We're in Baalbek, Lebanon, 1 hour's drive from the Syrian border, here in March 2015. And right now, we're approaching the quarry, or one of the two quarries, from which the giant stones, some 1,200 tons, were extracted. They call this Roman, but it's clearly much older. Had to have been done with lost ancient high technology of some kind. Okay, we're now approaching the main quarry at Baalbek. And this is the one called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. Now this is at least 1,200 tons, and recent excavations show that there are possibly larger ones underneath it. Okay, now climbing up on top of this massive block of limestone.
Biggest rock in the world, eh?
One of them. So here you get an idea that just the size of this thing is outrageous, and in relation to the temple where the other large ones are resting right now, that is the Temple of Jupiter in the background. Like many megalithic sites on the planet, this has been misidentified as possibly being a work of the Romans. Now the Romans built on top of the megalithic constructions at Baalbek, but there's no way they had the technology, tools, or probably even inclination to try to quarry the largest stone that would ever have been done in the Roman Empire, here, somewhat in the middle of nowhere in relation to Rome itself. So what we're looking at is a megalithic work predating the Romans, the Greeks, and the Egyptians by probably thousands of years, by an unknown civilization that clearly had some type of what we would call lost ancient high technology capability. So we're actually in the quarry itself here, and you can see the tool marks and the grayness, so you see a lot of weathering on this surface. This is the very recent, as in less than 6 months ago, removal of material. And you see those interesting, almost crisscross cutting marks, as well as along the bottom of this block, there's a continuous line that goes around it, as if there was another kind of tool attempting to be used to separate this block from the bedrock itself. And underneath, an even larger one that they were trying to extract. And we also have these test holes where they were testing for the integrity of the stone itself. Because this material is quite solid and holds together well, but on this wall, that's loosely compacted, almost junk, so you couldn't extract a large stone from this area. It would just crumble into pieces as it's doing here at the base.
Brain with a muscle.
Because look, if it is just a matter of size, it will be muscles. إنما في precision, في precise work done Giants cannot do precisely.
The highest state of
And
consciousness.
delicate.
Highest state of consciousness. Not only physical. Because as Alex said, from an engineering standpoint, it's more difficult because you think this is going to slide down as you cut it. Yeah. So it's more difficult, but they had a reason for doing it.
When rock sedimentates, there's magnetic alignments in the rock as it sedimentates.
Almost to the same angle.
Yes, yes.
We're looking at almost exactly the same angle of the unfinished oak.
It's so great when we work as a team. Everybody puts it in.
Yeah,
It's just incredible.
yeah.
That's what the chemist school is. It's a living book.
So this is another massive block of at least 1,000 tons as I crawl uphill in the quarry across the street. Of course, the whole thing was a quarry. And you can see where later cultures were trying to cut smaller pieces from the mega block. And it is possible that originally it was part of this massive limestone outcrop and then was cut and fell in its present position. But the question from there is, why did the work stop? Why did they not manage to either break it into pieces or move it, as they did 3 others, to the actual site of Baalbek, which is at least a mile or 2 in that direction? And there's a local story that the reason that the Romans built this massive structure here was to show their wealth and power, but that story was probably made up by the Romans. So we're at the site of Baalbek itself,
Go up there so we can
and this is where we have
the side.
the transition between manageable and these, which are huge.
Smaller pieces helping the pressure, reduce the pressure from the big ones. Yes, exactly. Yes.
So it's the same thing.
Yeah, the same pressure relief. زي اللي بنشوفها ايه في ال on the smooth.
Now this column is polished so smooth and so round, and this curved transition between the curve and the flat is so amazing. It's highly unlikely that this could be done with hand tools, because any sculptor, no matter how good they are, would tend to make a mistake of a dip or a bump. And even after thousands of years, there are no dips and bumps. And this edge, what's left of it, is very sharp. That gives us very strong evidence of the possibility of ancient machining technology. And now we're going to get Stephen Mailer's opinion about the finish on this piece of syenite
Cyanide
stone.
granite, obviously from Aswan. There are no granite quarries in all of Lebanon. And here's a perfect, smooth polish still on the stone, just like we see at Aswan.
Yeah.
And this is obviously from ancient Kemet.
And it's obviously, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to do that by hand, because your hand is feeling that that would be a perfect circle.
Perfect radius too, great arc radius, so it has to be machined.
Now, the Greeks and the Romans were able to do very beautiful work, as we can see here. You see that carving, gorgeous. But in general, they were only able to do that kind of work in either limestone or alabaster. When it comes to a material as hard as granite or syenite, which is what many of these columns are, the hardness of the stone, because of the crystal content and other minerals, is about 7 on what's called the Mohs scale, with the greatest or hardest stone that we know of being diamond at 10. So it's highly unlikely that they were capable of doing this fine, yet perfectly smooth surfaces in the granite or syenite. And the later cultures also were not able very well to work with that material, so we're left with no choice but to look at the idea that an even older culture was here that had forms of technology not available to the Greeks, the Romans, or indeed the dynastic Egyptians. And it's like in Peru and Egypt, we see obvious evidence of lost ancient high technology at work, such as this column here. Again, this is granite or syenite, and it is, by feel at least, a perfect circle in a very hard stone. So a site like this at Baalbek, you really have to decode it. It is so huge and so complicated because of the different cultures involved in its construction, and the fact that it's been ruined by later cultures, which is typical. Almost anywhere you go in the world, you find someone built something fantastic, the next culture maybe nurtured it and added on, and then barbarians of some kind come along and just like nuke most of the site and then use it as a quarry. But if we look really carefully, we're seeing definite megalithic, high-tech, lost ancient technology elements here. One of the most amazing places you could ever hope to see in your life is the ancient center of Petra in Jordan. Now, I'm sorry, but standard academics have got this place completely wrong, and you will see over the course of this video that the standard story of archaeologists makes no sense whatsoever, because the construction technology of the so-called Nabatean people, who were the supposed builders, was nothing compared to what would have been required to create Petra in the first place. This, here you can see ancient tool marks, and we see this and will see this over and over again, as well as this water channel that goes about 1.5 miles. It's been obviously repaired, likely by the so-called Nabatean people, but the original builders at this point in time are unknown. Okay, we're at the beginnings of what's called the Sikh, which is the entryway to the famous aspects of Petra in Jordan. And already we've been seeing tool marks similar to what we see at Baalbek in Lebanon and also on the Giza Plateau. Susan, our geologist, has stated that the stone in this area so far is likely about 7 on the Mohs scale out of 10. And in order to do that, to work this stone, you require very hard iron or steel tools. And they're talking conventionally that all this work was done 2,000 years ago, but where would they have gotten so many steel tools in order to do this work? So the Sikh here is a natural phenomenon. It was created by millions of years probably of water flow coming through, but in certain areas it's been expanded by somebody. And now we're going to look more and more for tool marks. So here you see more repair work that was done, likely by the Nabatean people, and also possibly by the Romans. Again, the first people who were organized in this area supposedly were these Nabateans, with a bit of Greek influence afterwards, and then the Romans appeared, and after that, Petra was largely abandoned. But this water channel, which is broken in places and repaired in other places, would have to have been originally constructed using very hard steel tools at a minimum. And it's quite amazing. It's on both sides of the Sikh, and repair work by the Nabateans and others is actually quite obvious. You see a primitive form of concrete or cement was utilized, as well as broken bits of stone. But in some areas, the entire sides of the channel or channels is eroded away. Here is primitive concrete being used to do repair. And here again, more repair work using concrete, clay pipes, and broken pieces of stone. Compare that to the original stonework. It's night and day. So the Sikh, I thought, was maybe a few hundred feet long, but as you can see, it just keeps going and going and going. And it leads you to the most famous part of Petra, which, of course, is called the treasury. The treasury is approximately 1% of the entire site of Petra. And there's another location half an hour's drive away called Little Petra, which obviously was constructed by the same people many, or likely many thousands of years ago. Now Petra, or at least the treasury aspect of Petra, of course, is world famous. Millions of photographs have been taken of it. And the sad thing is that there are many tourists who simply will travel down the Sikh from the entrance gate. They'll take photographs of the treasury, then they'll turn around and go back, having seen, as I said, maybe 1% of the site. From the beginning of the entry gate to the end is 12 kilometers, or 7 miles, with ruins on the left and right-hand side. It's worth more than one trip, so we will be returning in 2019. And here in front of the treasury, you can see not only a staircase, but also chambers that go underground, underneath the treasury. And within the treasury itself, there's a chamber which is likely somewhere in the nature of 100 feet long, 100 feet wide, and probably 30 feet high. The amount of stone volume would be somewhere in the nature of 300,000 cubic feet. Cutting this hole into the bedrock like that is a hell of a lot of work. So it's quite possible that the Nabateans found the treasury, at least the basic work, the cutting out the big chamber hall inside, etc. And then, since they were very wealthy people, because they were international in terms of trade, that they simply maybe hired Greeks to come and do all of the ornate carving of it. So again, like in many places, I think you're looking at two different time periods. You're looking at the initial shaping, which is just very pragmatic, being done by the first culture, and then the Nabateans, who arrived somewhere around 300 BC. Maybe by 100 BC, they had made enough of a fortune that they were able to hire experts in other countries to embellish the work, such as here at the famous treasury. The treasury is only a small percentage of what Petra is, which we'll see that way. So we leave the treasury behind because there are way too many tourists there, and I had no idea that this place was so massive. But we were told by an Australian engineer, Antonio, who had visited the year before, that it was a must-see because of its sheer scale, the astonishing amount of work that had been done, and the mysterious nature of who it was that did the actual work. You see this edifice? It's one of 20 or possibly 30 that are located at Petra. Very simple in execution, but a lot of work to produce. And here again, as we pan around, you'll see there are more and more of these amazing edifices. And the amount of weathering is quite astonishing too. Is this simply wind and sand over the course of a couple of thousand years? Or many, many thousands of years? It appears to me that the initial work is actually quite simple in terms of form, like that in behind. where you have flat surfaces, you have the caves or the chambers, you have this domed area, and sometimes this curve. And then after that came the Nabateans, who hired artisans to do the surface work, especially at the treasury, because the treasury is right at the opening of the Sikh, so that's why they wanted it to look spectacular. I guess they didn't have the finances to be able to get all of the rest of this done in detailed ornamentation, which you will see momentarily. Chamber after chamber after chamber, all stated as being tombs, but you're looking at millions of cubic feet of stone that had to have been removed in order to create these openings. And again, that would have to have been done either with a massive population of people with at least hardened steel tools or some form of lost ancient high technology. And what you're going to see in a following film is so-called Little Petra, which is not little at all, and it's very possible that in between Petra and Little Petra there are even more of these amazing cutout chambers. Among other things, Petra is astonishing because of its sheer scale. The idea that a tribal nomadic people started this from scratch and built the whole thing in the course of 200 or 300 years is completely ridiculous. But what's also amazing is we see many examples of ancient megalithic work in Peru and especially in Egypt, where acoustics were a vital aspect of the whole construction. And so what you're going to hear inside this massive chamber will probably, hopefully, blow your mind. So, tuned to Om, just like the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid. Oh! Done on purpose. And these are the original tool marks. Simple in design, but amazing execution. Okay, this is likely a Nabatean construction. One can imagine that someone comes in from the eastern deserts, discovers this site, finds almost all of this here, and decides to do some kind of construction. Since their ancestors lived in the desert, it's highly unlikely that they knew anything as regards stone carving, but building something out of stone, small stones, and mortar is likely. So it's pretty damn obvious to me that the site was found by the Nabateans because it's just so huge. I mean, it still goes off in this direction, off in that direction. As the geologist Susan Moore has stated to me today, this sandstone is not soft. Some sandstones can be soft, and others are harder. It depends upon how it was deposited, how much pressure has been applied over time during the deposition. If it was metamorphosed, then it becomes quartzite. This appears to be sandstone. But she says the hardness of the stone is about 7 out of 10, 10 being diamond. So you would require, at a minimum, probably carbon steel in order to be able to shape this. And there's just so much of it. And carbon steel did exist around 300 BC. I believe the Assyrians were the ones who were the masters of making it at that time. They likely did export it to places like Egypt and here, but it would require thousands upon thousands of tools to be able to do this work. So obviously this is site transformation. The caves and tunnels and chambers were found, and then a few of them, like the treasury, were later detail carving was done on them, because that's the first structure you see when you go through the Sikh. Just like in Peru, Bolivia, Turkey, Egypt, Greece, there's a megalithic component to these places which is much, much older than what conventional, hopefully soon to be retiring academics have to say about it.